Cunel, France. October 12th, 1918. A cold, wet morning in the Meuse-Argonne, with the smell of mud and cordite hanging over a landscape that had been chewed apart by 4 years of war. The Great War was in its final weeks, though nobody on the ground knew that yet. To the men crawling through the fog that morning, it felt like it might never end. In the middle of one of those advancing American companies was a tall, lean officer in his late 30s. He didn't shout. He didn't wave a pistol over his head. He didn't give speeches. He just moved forward, quietly, with the same calm focus he had once used to track deer through the hills of southern Indiana. In the next few hours, this man, a country boy who had never wanted to be famous, would do something that General John J. Pershing himself would later describe, without hesitation, as the finest individual feat of arms he had ever heard of in the American Army. This is the story of Samuel Woodfill, the best soldier almost nobody remembers. Samuel Woodfill was born on January 6, 1883, in a log cabin in Jefferson County, Indiana, close enough to the Ohio River that you could hear the steamboats on a quiet night. The cabin had been built by his father, John, a veteran of 2 American wars, the Mexican-American War of the 1840s and the Civil War of the 1860s. By the time Samuel was born, John Woodfill was an old man, well into his 70s, with a long gray beard and a long memory. It was the kind of household where the rifle above the fireplace wasn't decoration. It was a tool. The Woodfills hunted for food. They cleared land by hand. They lived close to the bone, in a part of the country that, in the 1880s, was still more forest than farm. Samuel grew up barefoot in the woods. He learned to shoot before he learned to read properly. By the time he was a teenager, he was the kind of marksman who could put a squirrel out of a tree with a single shot. Not because he was showing off, but because bullets cost money and missing meant going hungry. He was quiet, polite, tall and slim, with calm gray eyes and a steady way of speaking. He didn't drink much. He didn't swear. He read his Bible. He listened more than he talked, and he listened, especially, to his father's old war stories. In 1901, at the age of 18, Samuel walked into a recruiting station and enlisted in the United States Army. There was no war on at the time. There was no draft. Nobody had pushed him into it. He simply wanted to be a soldier the way some men want to be carpenters or sailors, because it felt like the work he had been born for. He was sent to the Philippines, where the United States was fighting a long, ugly insurgency in the wake of the Spanish-American War. He spent 3 years there in the jungle, learning what soldiering actually meant: the heat, the sickness, the ambushes, the long marches that went nowhere. He came home, re-enlisted, and was shipped to Alaska, where he spent years patrolling a frontier so cold and empty that most men would have lost their minds. Then came the Mexican border in 1916, chasing Pancho Villa with the punitive expedition. By the time the United States entered the First World War in April 1917, Samuel Woodfill had already been a soldier for 16 years. He had earned a commission as a lieutenant. He was 34 years old, married to a woman named Lorena, Blossom, and he was, by every measure, one of the most experienced infantry officers in the entire United States Army. Most men with his service record would have been given a desk job, a training command, something safe behind the lines. Woodfill asked to go to France. He arrived in Europe with the 60th Infantry Regiment, 5th Division, and was thrown into a war unlike anything the American Army had ever fought. Trenches, barbed wire, machine guns by the thousand, artillery that turned villages into geography, mustard gas, corpses in the wire that nobody could reach to bury. The Americans were green. Most of their officers had never seen combat. Woodfill, with his quiet competence and his 16 years of service, became exactly the kind of leader his men needed, the kind who didn't panic, didn't bluff, and didn't ask his soldiers to do anything he wasn't doing himself. By the autumn of 1918, the Allies had launched the Meuse-Argonne offensive, the largest American military operation in history up to that point, and still one of the bloodiest. Over 1 million American soldiers were committed to a 47-day battle that would cost more than 26,000 American lives. Woodfill's company was part of it. On the morning of October 12, 1918, his unit was ordered to advance through fog and rain toward the village of Cunel in the heart of the German defensive line. That was the morning everything happened. The advance began in fog so thick that men lost sight of each other within a few yards. Then the German machine guns opened up. A company that had been moving forward suddenly couldn't move at all. Bullets came from somewhere in the mist. Multiple positions, well-sighted, interlocking fields of fire. Men dropped. The advance stalled. The fog made it impossible to see where the fire was coming from, only that it was killing them. Lieutenant Woodfill did what came naturally to a man raised in the Indiana woods. He went hunting. He left his company in cover, took his rifle, and crawled forward alone into the fog. He spotted the first machine gun nest in a church tower. He dropped to the ground, took aim with the careful, unhurried marksmanship of a boy who had once shot squirrels for supper and killed the gunner. Then the assistant gunner. Then a third German who tried to take the gun. Then a fourth. Then a fifth. He fired 5 shots and killed 5 men, one after the other, with his rifle. He kept moving. He found a second machine gun position in a stable. He worked his way close, killed the crew with his rifle, and pressed on. A German officer tried to ambush him with a pistol. Woodfill killed him too. He found a third machine gun nest. As he closed in on it, a German jumped at him from a shell hole. Woodfill shot him with his Colt .45. He killed the rest of the crew the same way. Then came the part of the story that, even by 1918 standards, sounded like something out of a tall tale. Working his way forward again, he came upon a 4th machine gun position, and this time he ran out of room to shoot. The fight collapsed into the bottom of a trench, hand to hand, in mud and water. Woodfill grabbed a German pickaxe lying nearby and used it to kill the last 2 enemy soldiers in close combat. By the time it was over, one American officer, alone, with a rifle, a pistol, and finally a pickaxe, had silenced multiple German machine gun nests, killed roughly 24 enemy soldiers, and broken open the path for his entire company to advance. He was gassed during the action. He kept fighting. He didn't go to the aid station until the objective was taken. When General John J. Pershing, the commander of the entire American Expeditionary Forces, was later asked who, in his view, was the outstanding American soldier of the First World War, he didn't name a famous general. He didn't name Sergeant York, though York was already a household name. He named Samuel Woodfill. Woodfill received the Medal of Honor. He received the French Croix de Guerre. He received the Italian Croce al Merito di Guerra, the Montenegrin Order of Prince Danilo I, and decorations from several other Allied nations. When the war ended, he marched at the head of the victory parades alongside York and Major Charles Whittlesey of the Lost Battalion. 3 men, 3 legends. And then something strange happened. Samuel Woodfill went home, and the country forgot him. York wrote a book. York got a movie made about him with Gary Cooper. York became, for a generation of Americans, the face of the doughboy. Woodfill went back to the Army. He stayed in. He didn't write a book. He didn't go on the lecture circuit. He didn't cash in. He served quietly, was eventually demoted back to sergeant in the post-war drawdown — the Army had too many officers and not enough slots — and accepted it without complaint, because the Army was his home. He retired in 1923. He and Blossom moved to a small farm in Kentucky. They had no children. They had very little money. The Great Depression hit them hard. Blossom died in 1942. Woodfill kept living alone on the farm. When the Second World War came, the Army, perhaps remembering finally who he was, recalled him to active duty as a major and used him as a training officer for the new generation of soldiers. He was nearly 60. He did the job and then went home again. On August 10, 1951, Samuel Woodfill was found dead in his small farmhouse in Vevey, Indiana. He was 68 years old. He had died alone of a heart attack in near poverty. The country he had served for half a century did, in the end, remember him. He was reburied in Arlington National Cemetery in 1955 with full military honors. There's a particular kind of American soldier that the country produces every few generations and then loses track of. Quiet men, countrymen, men who shoot well because they grew up shooting, who endure because they grew up enduring, who do extraordinary things on extraordinary days and then go home and don't talk about it. Samuel Woodfill was that kind of man. On a foggy morning in France, alone, with a rifle and a pistol and finally a pickaxe in his hands, he did something that the commanding general of the entire American army called the finest feat of individual combat he had ever heard of. And then he went back to a small farm in Indiana and lived a quiet life with a quiet wife and was buried with very little fuss. The most famous line ever written about him came from Pershing himself, the outstanding soldier of the AEF. The most fitting line, though, might be simpler than that. Samuel Woodfill went hunting in the fog one morning in 1918, and he came back. The men who would otherwise have died in front of those machine guns came back too. That was enough for him. He never asked for more.